All right, everybody. Adam back with another episode of the Bowhunter Chronicles podcast. And tonight, I've got a couple of guests on here. I've started this new venture. One of them is a really good friend of mine, and one of them is a really good hunter. And I consider them both friends. You can pick who is who. Maybe go back, listen to a couple of the podcasts that we've done, and you decide who's the better hunter. We've got Walter Lee and Parker McDonald. And previously, they hosted two different YouTube channels, two different podcasts, both very Southern centric. Now, the Parker with the Southern ground, you would think he would have merged with somebody else with this name problem that he's had, his whole podcasting YouTube career, but he chose to go slumming down in Florida with the chasing tails fella. So how are you guys doing tonight?
Good, man.
Good. That was an intro, man.
It was.
What an
It
intro.
was.
Well,
I'm
I
glad
mean,
you
Give
I'm
us
glad
more
you
money.
consider me a great friend.
yeah. And we're looking once again at Walter's biggest buck there. And I absolutely love it. But yeah, so a lot has happened since the last time we've talked, Parker. You want to, guys have heard from Walter here and there, and I was just on the podcast where apparently my humor does not translate to the South as well as it does up here. But what's been going on down there for you?
Man, dude, just staying busy. I don't remember how long ago it was the last time that I was on Bowhunter Chronicles, but I started a business doing graphic design and web design, and actually did some of your stuff. Uh, Shoot, man, probably about a year ago, a little over a year ago, some of your design work for t-shirts. So been doing that, going steady, and it's actually, kind of the reason why we decided to go ahead and do this thing with me and Walter. Walter is somebody I consider to be one of my best friends, and we talk every day. We have two different brands, or we have had two different things that are very similar, that have similarities at least, and we would brainstorm these ideas together, and nobody would ever actually do the idea because we kind of come up with it together, you know what I'm saying? And so um I was like, dude, I'm so busy, I'm too busy with this business, and I know that Southern Ground needs to scale. Let's put a lot these ideas that we've come up with in the past, let's just put them together, let's join forces and do this thing, because I knew going into this new season of business, going into actually got a pretty cool opportunity that I'm going to be doing this fall with Tethered, with the Tagged Out tour. I'm going to be producing that show, and that's about to take up a ton of my time as we get closer to fall. And so I knew I was going to need somebody, and I trust Walter. Walter is a great guy. He's built a great thing with chasing tails, and it just made sense, man. And so when you ask what's going on, that's literally been my focus, is build this business and figure out how to scale Southern Ground. And the best way I've figured out how to scale Southern Ground is to quit and start something new. That makes sense, right?
And for you, Walter,
Yeah.
does that sound about right? What's been going on for you? And how does it change what you're doing down at Chasing Tails? Because you kind of went, from a story based, and this is the way we want to do it, and then into like a hunting, and then it kind of ended up being like, man, like nobody's doing like Florida content, nobody's doing leaning into kind of like where you're at. And you've kind of evolved over the years, and so how did that go into this merger?
Yeah. I mean, I think Parker hit the nail on the head. It's one of those things where it's really hard in the South to find people who want to talk. And, it was always one of these things where like I would record with a guest, and then Parker's trying to figure out how to record with that same guest 2 weeks later. and drop an episode, or vice versa. He's
I was about to
smiling because
say,
of that order.
come on, dude. Really?
But tell me, how many times did you hold back on an idea just because one of us would probably be like about to work on the same thing and you did want the drop to be like too close? Or I mean, we'd have a guest on at least 3 times. At least 3 times, like, hey, I just recorded with such and such. You're like, I'm about to drop something with him next week. And we're like, okay, I'll kick mine down 2 weeks to give some separation.
Hey, I'm gonna start a turkey podcast. Oh man, we've pretty much just did that.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
And
that was
so
kind of it, right? That was kind of the moment that was like, why did we do that?
yeah. And I remember having this lunch break conversation with Parker where Parker's like, I'm just so tired of having to spend time doing this when I'm good at that. And I said the exact same thing. And it was one of those things where a year before we kicked this off, we had this about a year and a half, we had the same conversation. And we hadn't either both hit that point where we just realized we had not enough time. And Greg Godfrey is, I consider him the business mentor for both of us. He said, I'd rather have a bigger piece of a smaller pie than the entirety of a small pie. And I think what people are going to see is not necessarily not now. We have plans years 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Not now. You're not going to see more content, but I think what you're going to see is more consistent content that will have theme-based components to it. We're going to plan out seasons. One of the biggest podcasts that Parker did was Legends of the Fall. I think that's what you called it, right? Was Legends of the Fall?
Nope, that was a
What'd you call it?
movie. But it was it was called Local Legends.
Local Legends. There you go. Legends of the Fall is a good movie. And then we did a habitat series in Florida, and it felt like that kind of series where you put that intentionality into putting something together that built on it as it went was something that was sorely needed, as well as community. And so we're leaning into that really hard. I do think people are going to get more content in a variety of sources. The podcast is probably going to be a weekly basis still moving forward, and I think everybody is going to see a camaraderie they're not used to seeing in the hunting space. And I think that is really already showing to be valued. And I think it's going to be something that when people realize it's kind of been lacking, I know it's not everywhere. It's kind of regionally specific, obviously Southern Collective. But I think when people realize that that's what's been lacking for a while and they didn't realize it, it's going to hit home and they're going to want to be a part of it and they're going to want to support it. So I think Parker hit the nail on the head. That's all I have to add.
So from the hunting standpoint, and for us guys up here in the north, or maybe like the Midwest, like what is it that's going to what can we gather, or what can be gained for us from following along with you guys?
Well, can I take this, Walt?
Go for it, buddy. Absolutely.
Because I'm gonna toot your horn a little bit again. I have always kind of stood by that. I think hunting in Florida is probably the hardest state in the country that has whitetails, I should say. You know what I mean? Like, Florida does have whitetail hunting, and it is a strong culture of hunting there, but it is tough, man. And I think there's a lot of things that factor into that. But Florida's tough, and if you can pinpoint guys in Florida good, who are good deer hunters, you can probably learn something that you can apply anywhere in the country. And because I think it is that hard. And so somebody who's consistently killing good bucks or bucks, legal bucks on public land in Florida, man, they could probably teach you a thing or two. And so I've never hesitated to have a Florida guest on our show, and it's never crossed my mind that somebody in Georgia might not benefit from this. Of course they will. And so I think it works the same for people in, let's just say, let's just use Michigan as the example here. I've hunted in Florida. I've never hunted in Michigan, so I cannot tell you this 100% for certain, but I've watched videos of people hunting in Florida, and I can absolutely draw parallels to the two when you talk about swamps and marshes. I have been to North Dakota, and I've seen these, like, those cattail marshes that just expand, are just vast expanses, and that's super similar to what deer are doing in Florida. And so I think if you can pinpoint those guys in Florida or South Alabama or whatever, let's just use this swamps as the example here. If you can pinpoint the swamp killers in Florida, Alabama, Louisiana, whatever, man, in a place where there are more deer, higher deer numbers, and maybe better buck to doe ratios, maybe better age structures. If you can apply those things, dude, your odds of success in these really good solid hunting states. And I know Michigan has high deer numbers, low mature buck numbers is kind of what I understand. But if I cannot tell you 100% for certain because I'm not the biologist here, but I would venture to say that it is a little bit easier, or a little bit more likely that you're going to kill a mature deer in Michigan than it is in Florida. And so, yeah, I mean, anywhere I've been in the Midwest, if I'm trying to draw parallels from Southern hunting, I've been able to. Does that make sense? Like, it's never been a struggle for me to draw these parallels, and it's in my experience, it's worked. There are a lot, and it's definitely helped with these northern hunts or Midwestern hunts that I've done in the past.
So, in your opinion, because like I said in that brief intro, Walter's going to tell you that hunting in Florida is so hard, just because it is. But why, in your opinion, having hunted multiple states and killed deer all over, obviously at this point very successfully, what makes Florida so difficult?
Man, there's a number of factors. Florida is one of the only places that hunting over dogs or is legal, right? And you can do it on public land, and you can do it on these national forests, and there can be just dogs running all over the place, and people, perched up in the roads with a AR waiting for a deer to cross the road. and this is like on the national forest roads that people drive every day. And you just roll up, and there's like a line of people with their guns hung out the windows. You're like, what the crap is going on here? And so these deer are getting pressured every day. Every day that gun season is open, that is legal, these deer are getting pressured, and they've also adjusted to a lot of that pressure. And the other thing I would say is the liberal bag limits that have existed in the past. Most would say it's still a pretty liberal bag limit. Walter, you can kill $5 now in Florida, right?
Yep.
And it used to be $1 a day or $2 a day or something. What was it? $2 a day.
Yep.
And not a lot of emphasis
and no
on
antler restrictions.
Antler restrictions.
Yeah.
I mean, that screws a lot of things up for a long time, for generations. That type of abuse of the resource, and Alabama was the same thing not long ago, and I think that's why it's hard here. I think that's what makes Alabama hard, is just a previous generation of abuse of the resource, and not abuse sounds harsh. Like, people were doing just what they knew. It wasn't like anybody was trying to do it on purpose. It just is what it is. I remember a time in my lifetime hunting that you could kill a buck a day in Alabama. You can still kill a doe every day of the season with a bow if you want to. The other thing in Florida is there are a crap load of does, and there's not a lot of opportunity to shoot them. Like, it's really low opportunities to shoot them. I could tell you somewhere in Florida, I could point you to a tree in Florida right now that you could probably go into and see 15 does if you wanted to. I could not tell you a tree in Alabama that I could guarantee you to see 15 does, but I could in Florida because there are so freaking many. That makes it hard for anybody. I think probably Michigan deals with similar issues with there's so many deer and not a lot of opportunity. Is that correct?
So I would say like Michigan, we have a culture and it's not like that. So it's not where you can just kill all the bucks all the time. But I don't know what the hunter numbers are like in Florida or in Alabama, but we're talking, you know, 500,000, 600,000 licenses sold, or, hunters. So we've got a lot of people killing deer. And during our rifle season, it's, and, bow hunting now is, taken off, and, there's just as many bow hunters and with crossbows and things like that. But you have generations of the I want to shoot my buck guy, and they just shoot the first buck that comes out, and then we can shoot two bucks. So then the second one now has to have four on one side. But in the past, you got one with a bow and one with a gun, and they just shot the first deer that came out. And there's no talk of like age structure. We've got tons and tons of public land, so we've got all these hunters crammed on public land, especially with rifles, shooting, the first antlers that they see. And that's success, is that, I got my buck. And that's, somewhat changing through like the QDMA movements and all that stuff. But, now with some of the CWD stuff, there were no antler point restrictions. And, many areas you can buy 10 doe permits, which to you guys doesn't seem like that much, as you shoot a deer a day or two does a day or whatever.
Two
But
a
if you've
year in
got,
Florida.
but if you've got, 500,000 hunters that can buy 10,
Yeah.
It's, it's a lot. It can, take out an area pretty easily. But for the pressure, that's the issue. Like, dogs and all that stuff is way different, thought process around here. But, you know, there's a there's a reason that it's called the Orange Army. There's a reason that, I mean, I remember when I was in college, I took the train one opening day from where I live down to Chicago. And like, you're always looking for deer in the car anyways. Well, I'm looking out, and then like every single piece of land, and even like right on the train tracks, there's guys in lawn chairs with rifles. And, everywhere that there could be a guy sitting with a rifle, that there was. And it was, and that was, even on private land. So the public is just all, I mean, that's why when I was growing up, before I started bow hunting, like seriously, bow hunting used to be just until you got to gun season. And when gun season came, you shot your deer because there was always deer and you could always shoot them. Wasn't what, there was no, like, that's when you shot deer, was with the rifle. But before that, like, we had the luxury of hunting private land, and like public land was less than. It was like, because you had to go out there with a rifle, and it was dangerous. I remember being in the UP sitting in a tree and seeing guys with just driving down the two tracks with their muzzles out the window, like, we're gonna find us a deer, you know. So
Well, we get 3 months of that. That's another thing that I didn't mention is like our gun seasons in the South are so long. Like, and you could look at a deer census. I think I've seen one from like, I can't remember, 2014 or something like that. And Mississippi, I think, had the highest deer density in the country. But Mississippi has this like crazy long rifle season, and deer are smart. You know what I mean? Like, you can be surrounded by 25 deer and maybe only see one or none, and never know it. The other factor in that is the weather. Like, it's just freaking hot in Florida all the time, nonstop. You get a cold front, man, you're talking like 40 degrees, like not that cold. Um, and that influences deer movement 100%. You can have a ton of deer, but they're not going to get up and start moving around um, in 110-degree heat unless they have to, right before daylight or right before sun up, right before sundown. That's typically it, and that is true all across the country. That's the majority of the movement time, right? Like that's when we get in the woods. It's when we see most of our deer. Um, but in Michigan, you could have it in Michigan in October. It's going to be fairly decent outside, right? Like it's going to be nice. Sometimes you're going to get nicer weather than they got in Florida in October, I promise.
Yeah.
At least nicer as it pertains to deer hunting. And so, man, I think there's a lot of factors like that go into it. Um, and I hate, even Walter knows this, I hate even being the guy that says that it's just harder down here. Like if you're born and raised down here, you don't really have any excuse for being bad at hunting here. That's kind of where you're at. So figure it out. But I will say that, man, sometimes it just is harder down here.
So with your collective and
Can we pause though real quick, because you asked a really important question there, and then you asked a second one, and it kind of dominated that. You said what can they take away? Like what could your listeners get? You talked a lot about the strategy in that. I also just want to put an impetus on, we have northern listeners who either live currently or did live in the Deep South who are part of that community. Your listeners know about the Patreon community, but we have a lot of people who travel down here to hunt with us, who have moved down here and now have made plans to leave and move to greener pastures when it pertains to hunting. And so if you want to test that theory at a bare minimum and see whether or not what Parker's saying and what I believe to be true, that group has got, I think last time I checked, about 5 or 6 guys who have experience living in both, hunting in both, and are very quick to give you their opinions about it and the things that they've learned along the way. And I think when you come to the Deep South, you have to be very flexible mentally. You can't go into an area thinking I'm looking for this and then I'm going to hunt it, because the telltale sign could be different. There's no bell curve to the rut in Florida. You have this drawn out rut that's really, really long. And so you could have a hot feed tree strategy in December in the peak of the rut without deer running around, because all those doe groups are bred out or just aren't ready yet. And so it keeps you on your toes in a sense that I think it requires you to be more flexible with your mindset every time you go into the woods as to what you're looking for. And those people are very eager to share those experiences with you in that group, in that community. So there's a lot of experience there from people who are well traveled, who are willing to literally just open up the playbook and tell you what they found.
so with that, and that kind of goes into this, but with your Southern collective and you guys bouncing your influences off of one another, what is it going to take for you to go, you, Walter, to leave Florida, to leave the South, to go to the Midwest, to these greener pastures? Like, is that something that we're going to see? Because when Parker was talking about Florida and his travels and things transitioning, I feel like that's kind of like the way that Michigan is, in the sense of, like, in the last podcast we did with David Riley was really really good, and it kind of opened my eyes to some of that. But I think the idea here in Michigan is like, well, if you want to kill big bucks, you just go to other states and it's easier because there's more big bucks, and Michigan hunting is, somewhat difficult just based on, all the factors that we kind of already talked about. So when you go to, if you can get on deer consistently here in Michigan, when you go to Ohio, when you go to, Indiana, some of these other states, like, it's pretty easy, Missouri, to find deer, and people have success. So we haven't really seen that from you, Walter, like leaving Florida to go. And I know that it's the Southern collective and it is all of that, but to just for proof of concept, like, when are you going to go prove that concept?
It sounds like a call. That sounds more like a calling out and less of a question.
Yeah, no, I think it's one that serves two masters. I don't know when that's going to be. I mean, the obvious answer to your question is my lifestyle is built around the opportunities that I have, the resources that I have right now. And I got a 2-year-old at the house, and a wife who's in her MBA program. And so my wife will be done with that soon. And, that'll occur probably about the tail end of year one for SoCo. There is a whole season's worth of content that Parker and I have talked about branding, you know, uh, you know, the Southern boys go Midwest, the Southern boys go up north, and let's see what happens to it. That's an idea that we've talked about, and it could happen as early as year two. But at least for this upcoming year, you're going to see me just kind of be the local terror of the South. I'm going to hit Georgia, Florida, and Alabama for deer season, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and Tennessee for turkey season. But all of those are places that, uh, you know, kid has a stomach virus, and my wife is trying to balance schoolwork. I can immediately pick up and be back. But as this progresses, I'm very eager. Like I'm very eager to test my skill set outside of this state, and I can tell you that as I leave this state and I go to other places, whether on vacation for turkeys and walking around trying to find where deer are. Or just moving through upwards through the state of Georgia as you get into ag country and then up into the mountains, finding the deer is much more efficient. I'm much more efficient at finding them. And so I feel like I've kind of have a tasting of what it's going to be like and as it translates. And so I probably year two, but maybe year three at the absolute latest. I think you're going to start to see some Midwestern hunts. Jake Bush is coming down to hunt with us in January, and one of the things we talked about was he was going to come down and hunt in January, and he invited me up to Ohio. And so that's kind of a rigged thing. That's like shooting fish in a barrel because he ties up all his deer in August. But it'll at least give me some insight as if the areas we're hunting, if I would even hunt them, and he'll be able to break down the why. And here's the thing, whether I fall flat on my face or not, I don't care. Like I'm going to show the whole thing to everybody. I don't care. This isn't a pride thing. I don't say, hey, this is the hardest place, beads on chest, right? It kicked me in the teeth for 5 to 7 years. Every time I leave the state of Florida, within a few days, I find deer. And there was a whole 2 seasons there I never saw a deer, and that was debilitating. It's just different here. The talk about Parker, the generation of it takes generations to repair it. That starts when you start doing what you're supposed to actually repair it. And in this state, they want to boost the population, and their idea of boosting the population is not killing the doe producing deer. That's not what QDMA says. It's not actually how you get things into alignment. It's not how you stabilize a rut, which is how you stabilize fawn drop, and you increase your population by having everything drop at once. And so it's just going to be interesting to me. I'm really looking forward to it, and I can't wait to get my teeth kicked in the Midwest and have people just dropping comments left and right. Adam will be the first person probably to comment on YouTube.
Hey, I'm your biggest champion, man. I've been trying to get you to leave that stinking state of Florida for half a decade now. But now one of the things that I'm curious about, because of that, and it kind of goes back to that question a little bit, but with what you guys are doing and having a very good following, camaraderie, all of that with the South and the Southern collective, how much of this venture is going to be just about tactics and all of that, or is it going to be stories and everything kind of melded in? And Walter has told me before, like, oh, you pigeonholed yourself with this bow hunting name, and you guys are now, and Parker had it previously, with the South, with the Southern collective. How much of that deviates from your like mission statement going out of, north or west or whatever?
How much of the are you saying that does it deviate our vision to hunt up north or to do anything based out of the north? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, kind of, by saying, because like if I were to be like, okay, here's all my rifle hunting episodes, well, it's kind of off brand for that, and like having you bring in an audience from the South, and now we're hunting Ohio or New York, all that stuff. Like how do you guys see this as going forward with that, with kind of that stuff mixed in, right?
I mean, I think the best thing is just what you already said. It's proof of concept, right? Like if we're a bunch of jokers going around claiming that hunting in the South is harder, and big bucks are there's less big bucks or less mature bucks, it's harder to kill a mature deer in Alabama than it is in Kentucky. Well, then my butt better be killing a mature deer in Kentucky. You know what I mean? Like, or at least seeing them, at least having the encounters. I think it can only translate so much because an out of state trip is going to be a week. You have a week to go and figure out everything. You got to figure out everything to try to find a mature deer, execute, make the shot, recover it, all that. Here at home, where I'm at in Alabama, while I do believe it would be harder if you take some person from New York and said, "Hey, go hunt Kentucky," and then go hunt Alabama, I think everybody would say Alabama is harder. Um, I think if you live here, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. If you live here, you don't really have any excuse. Like your home place, you really don't have an excuse. Like you've got the time, you've got the ability. If you love hunting, then you're gonna find the time. You're gonna prioritize it. You're gonna hang your trail cameras. You're gonna do your thing. If it's on your private land, you're gonna fill your feeders. You're gonna do whatever. You go to some place you've never been before, and it makes it a whole lot harder. So all that to say, like, if we're gonna go around claiming that, then we better have something to back it up. And honestly, it is more fun to go and hunt a place where you have a better chance of shooting a mature deer. It's way less stressful. It's way less stressful than it is trying to do a hunt or go after a particular deer here. Um, to go out and know, if I do my due diligence, if I do my put in my couple of days of scouting, and go through this system that I know works, uh, like I know it's going to pay off, or I know it's at least I'm going to get the opportunity. I can't say that about when I go on a trip to Florida. Man, I don't know what the heck I'm going to see. I don't know. I don't know if I'm even going to find a spot worth hunting in the whole time that I'm there. Um, anyways, that was a long way of answering your question. I think it's just the reason why it goes with what we do is because it's proof of what we're saying.
And I think I'd also take a step further and say that it's the consummate November thing to do in the South is to go kill big bucks in another state.
That's right.
I don't know a single diehard, and I mean like diehard deer hunter, that has the means to travel that doesn't leave and then kill a big buck in another state. Like I'm sure they are there, right? I'm sure people come home empty-handed, but no one in my friend circle from Florida, from Georgia, from Alabama goes out to these Midwestern states and doesn't come home with something substantially larger than what they run into here. And so we've been doing that for a long time. We recognized a long time ago that there was just opportunities in places like Kansas and Missouri and the Dakotas. And I think that as much as it's a can they get it done thing, dude, that's just what we do down here. We crush everything that walks out in the back 40. If you're lucky enough to have a couple hundred acres, you're maybe growing some deer, but you're filling the freezer in the deep south. Maybe you shoot a hammer, but everything on your wall, it's coming from a Midwest state somewhere. It's coming from Kentucky, or it's just part of it, man. I just grew up with guys. They were on the hunting camp that I grew up on. There was a group of them that would go to the Midwest every year. They would hunt public land every year, and they would go to Michigan. They would go, no, they wouldn't go to Michigan. They went to Wisconsin. They went to Ohio. They went to Kansas and Missouri. I don't know of a single year they came back without like 4 or 5 huge bucks. And we're only talking about 4 or 5 guys. So there is no shortage of guys in our tribe that aren't planning those Midwest hunts. And guys like Chicken Buck, who literally they'll go punch all their tags in one state, pick up camp, go to another state, punch all their tags, pick up, and go to the next one. And they're all shooting great deer. So it's who we are as much as cornbread and college football.
Well, Walter, the other thing you didn't, I thought you were going to mention it, and you didn't, but it really doesn't like get in the way of most of our rut times to go and
Yeah.
travel and hunt the rut in another state, because the southern rut is notorious for being goofy, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
30 minutes in either direction from my house, I have a different rut. And when I say a different rut, I mean like different months. So like I'm going to have a November rut 30 minutes from my house. I've also got a December rut 30 minutes from my house. I've got February and January ruts within 30 minutes from my house. And I'm talking about like one WMA might be one rut and another one might be another one. And they're significant. Like I'm not talking about like primary ruts and secondary ruts and things like that. Like these are their ruts. And so like as long as I'm not going out of state or to the Midwest in December or January, then I can still get all my good hunting time in here at home and still travel for October and November when it's getting good in other places.
I can see that, and I've heard that from Walter, and then from some of the other guys as well. And I really like that. It sounds a lot like Michigan, to tell you the truth. I mean, I know you consider that like the Midwest, but I've got a lot of people in my circle too that leave the state of Michigan and kill. They'll exactly what Walter said. They'll kill, a basket 8 and a 6-point or a 7-point, fill their tags, and then just be like, I just want to kill, just want to fill both my buck tags. And now I'm going to Ohio. Now I'm going to Kentucky. Now I'm going to, wherever. And that's pretty standard for the serious guys. I want to shift gears here a little bit just because it's something that like popped in my mind. And while I've got you guys on here, I think it's a good topic for right now, getting ready for the season and for guys that are trying to get their gear in order. I'm pretty sure, Parker, that you had influenced Walter down this journey. And I'm not singling out Walter, probably with a whole movement because of the way that you video and your cinematography and things like that with your kayak hunting, right? So for guys that are looking into it, and for myself, like I go back and forth. The thing that I struggle with is like, how do I get back? Because like it's easy to float down. It's difficult to paddle up. And especially like with the river that I've got near me, like I've got buddies that have done it. We've done it with trolling motors. We've done it out of boats, all this stuff. But like to just go put in a kayak into the river system that I have, going upstream, it would be a lot of work. Like I said, we'll get into that, but like choosing a kayak without a $2,000 budget, right? So how do you, like, where you started, the kayak that you started in, or like when this first like came to be, to kind of like upgrades, and like what would you be looking for?
Yeah. I would tell anybody to use what you have, right? If you've got a kayak, use it. See if if it's not a hunting, a pretty heavyweight load kayak, then you're gonna find holes, in the system. Like it's not gonna be great, but use it, right? And come up with a reason to invest. And it was all a progression for me because last year I didn't even use a kayak. I don't think I even used a kayak one time because I kind of got to a different stage in life. I could afford a boat. Most of the water that I was on, that I was hunting, a boat is perfectly fine. I will say there's plenty of other applications for a kayak, and that's why I'll never get rid of it. And it will continue to be an option for me, is because I have encountered places where you couldn't get a boat in and you had to drag a kayak to it and all that stuff. But I think you should, I will say this to, in response to what you said, I don't know how to get back, or how do I get a deer out, or whatever. Ted Bright, I don't know if you've ever had Ted on the show or not, but Ted Bright once said something kind of in passing to me, and but it really stuck out. And Ted's a killer, man. He's an absolute killer. And he said, I don't ever think about how I'm going to get the deer out before I've killed it. That's just not an option to think about that. So whenever I tell people, like, yeah, just go take what you got, use what you got. Don't think about how you're going to get out. obviously take safety into consideration and don't do something stupid, but use what you got. Find a place to use what you got. Now, if you're saying it's almost impossible to get, back upstream or whatever, yeah, like I would invest in use what is the most efficient method, right? Like don't the kayak is sexy, and I've had to talk myself out of this a lot. Kayak is super sexy and it looks cool, and the pictures are awesome. I love the pictures that I've gotten from using a kayak. I think they're just cool. But it may not be your best option, right? Like maybe get a boat with a trolling motor. That's you can find plenty of those for under $2,000. Um, I will say if somebody says, I really just want to use a kayak, I think it's sweet. I think it's cool. I think I mean, I would agree with you for a person on a budget who doesn't want to buy a boat and it's fairly low maintenance. A kayak with a trolling motor is perfect. And you can put it anywhere. You're limited by your battery, like anything, but that's a great option. And I would say used, you could probably find what you need. A good, canoe, a one-person canoe would be awesome. Or what I use, which is the new canoe. You could under $2,000 if that's the kind of the line, you could find that used, and you could probably find it new, honestly, like an F12 Frontier 12 or the Unlimited. I'm not sure exactly how it's running right now. It's the newer model, but any of those boats, man, they're awesome. They're killer for a kayak hunt.
So I just
Yeah,
I just look
can
at it
I?
and yeah, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just look at it and I say, I wasn't thinking about getting the deer back out. So I know
Yeah.
like my buddy and I were in a canoe, and I don't know if they had just opened the dam or what, but we both had paddles and we had a trolling motor and we were going nowhere upstream. And it was like we just crossed the river. We went for like 20 minutes and got like maybe 20 yards, and we were like, all right, we're just crossing the river and we're just gonna walk because there's nothing we can do. And I like that's I don't ever think about that as like being a barrier. Like it's always coming out of the woods. Like, so you've
Yeah.
just, you float down, you get in your spot, do all the things that sound great, like that make kayak hunting this great thing. But like, if you're on significantly moving water, it's like, okay, so now it's dark. You just want to get back and you're fighting this current with this awkward load, or, depending on how, what boat you're in. And it's just like, okay, like
Well,
that's where it doesn't become sexy anymore for me.
well, you just named the reason why it's effective, why it's an effective method, is because like being out, I don't care if it's a current or not, being out in the water on a kayak by yourself in the dark is freaking scary.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not used to it, like the first 2 years of me doing it, it was like I would automatically think about every scary movie that I ever watched, and what one thing that um you know, if you don't hear somebody say it, you don't think about is fog on the water in the morning or in the evening after it's rained or something like that. Bruh, that will down here we say that'll make your butthole wink, because it does.
Mm-hmm.
It's scary, dude. And then you add in like freaking uh I said scary, and Siri started going nuts. Did y'all hear that? Did y'all
Mm-mm.
hear
No.
Siri?
No.
Yeah. Oh, I think I said her name again. Uh, I said scary, and she thought I was talking to her. Um, but I've been on places where like that fog mixed with the idea that there's alligators and snakes there, um, probably not going to get you. You're not going to get got by alligators and snakes most likely, but it's the thought they're there, and it's like I took Mark Kenyon. He came up or came down and hunted with me a couple years ago, and he said he nearly threw up because of the fog, because he didn't know where he was, man. And you're out there on bodies of water and you can't see anything. So it is scary, and you can't really get past that. It's kind of daunting. There are bodies of water that are easier and a little bit less scary, but I know exactly what you're talking about, man. Like, there's some places it's just too much for me. I'm not going to go back. Maybe if I was in my 20s again and I didn't have kids, I didn't have a wife, didn't have a whole lot to live for, like maybe I'd do it still. But there's places that I know there are deer and good deer, and I'm just not going to go to them because they're just a little more risky. And you're going to find those, man. And the name of the game is figuring out the way to get there and doing the thing that other people aren't going to do. And it's not all like I've been on places. This is a great example. Last year we went to a WMA. Me and my dad went down to a WMA. We haven't hunted much, and it's largely water access, but it's bigger bodies of water, so it's boats, a lot of duck hunters and stuff out there. And there was a lot of people hunting on this particular gun hunt. There was a lot of people out there. But what we noticed was when we got to the boat ramp, and we weren't even getting there super early. We were getting there around 5 o'clock. We put the boat in, roll up the river, 5 miles, 2 to 5 miles, something like that, and get to our spot, get set up, wait for the sun to come up, and not hear or see a single person until right at daybreak. All of a sudden, there's boats everywhere, everybody coming in. I mean, last year on that hunt, we got to a spot, and I ended up killing a buck on this sit. But I had like three guys come off the water after daylight, like right around the same time, and just all their headlamps. I could see across the river where my dad was, and I could see headlamps all over there. And all of a sudden, there's people everywhere. But you know what? Me and Dad were seeing deer. We were seeing a lot of deer, actually, and I ended up shooting a buck, you know, that same morning. Um, and then the same thing happened in the evenings, right at the perfect time, right before dark, when the deer should be getting up and moving, or at least it's your best time to see them. Boats are cranking up and going down the river because ain't nobody want to be on that water after dark. Um, and so like even I found even places where water access is the primary thing, that darkness, man, it gets to people. It gets to you.
And so, what were you going to say? What's been your experience?
Well, I just wanted to throw two things out there. So what Parker said about being able to get it out. Parker gets these killer shots with a really nice setup with a whole deer in it. If all you have is a Pelican 10-foot kayak, learn to pack out a deer, bone it out, figure out a way to put it in a bag, put it on the back of the kayak, right? I see a lot of people who get really hung up on, and you see it literally every year, like, hey, I'm trying to find the best kayak at an affordable price. I can get a deer out. And I'm like, dude, if you live in my neck of the woods, you're looking at about 60 pounds of meat on an enormous deer. You can find a space. I mean, that's a huge deer. Um, my 115-pound buck mixed with pork fat yielded 40 pounds, right? So you're talking about less than that coming out with you, right? You put it in a trash bag, you put it in the back of the kayak, and you get it out of there. So don't let that stop you. Just whatever you've got, the kids' kayak, make it happen. Um, Adam, I would say if you're looking like budget route, riveted John boats with a trailer routinely outside of the state of Florida, you can find them $500 to $700 on the maximum end of the things. In fact, if you look in like middle Alabama, they're like $500. You get a 14-foot riveted John boat with a trailer. Please, mother of God, come get it out of my backyard. It's been sitting here forever, right? And you could probably get it for a little bit cheaper. And you can put a small longtail motor on the back of that thing for about $500. And so for all in for $1,000, you've got a boat that'll get you absolutely anywhere a kayak will, as long as the width of that boat can fit where you're wanting it to go. 6 inches of water with rocks, it doesn't matter. It's getting there. And so if you're listening to this podcast and you're in the Midwest, and again, this is the kind of information that you're going to get from listening to the Southern Collective, because a longtail is a waterfowl thing and then a recreational tool in Florida, right? I mean, it's just a way of having fun down here because our water's so choked out with vegetation. We have to have longtails. Um, it's light. It's going to tote real easy. It's a lawnmower motor, right? Can you service your lawnmower? Sweet mother of God, you don't belong listening to this podcast aspiring to hunt if you can't keep your motor on your mower running, right? $1,000 brand new, and you've got a rig that is probably going to last you 10 years without any kind of service. I mean, yeah, you're going to have to keep the grease bearing, the grease on the bearings, but that's it. There are really affordable ways. You just kind of have to think outside the box a little bit.
Adam, I have a question for you.
Sure.
As Walter's talking about this, my gears are just turning, man, because I have never seen I've seen plenty of southern hunting stuff, deer hunting, and a lot of people down here use the long tail motors like that for deer hunting. But I hear and have seen videos of like these big, huge marshes and stuff that y'all have out there, or big bodies of water that are kind of choked out by vegetation. And I have never seen anything from any of the Midwestern or Northern states of anybody using one of those to deer hunt. Is that like, is it legal? Is it possible? Do you know? I mean, I figured duck hunters use them up there.
I mean, I've seen them like just down the road from my in-laws. Somebody's got one, and they I forget what they call them, like a mud motor or whatever. You see them every once in a while for, like, say, with duck hunters. Like that's, but it's just really not a thing, and I couldn't tell you why. And when Walter's talking about that, like my buddy Eric, who has been on the podcast, hunts with me. Like, he hunts out of a aluminum bass boat. Like, that's what he's got with you know and then we've hunted out of John boats or whatever, just with tiller motors and stuff like that. But it's just you got to do all the stuff with the with the trailer and all that stuff, and it's just but as far as the mud motor goes, like, it doesn't, I don't think I've ever seen anybody hunt with one. And I guess probably what it is most of the people up here that I think would go that route probably already have a boat for fishing the river for steelhead or walleye or whatever. And so that's just the boat that that would be the motor of choice. They wouldn't buy another motor just to put on that boat.
Well, I'll bet you there's somebody listening to this who is a hardcore enough deer hunter and has some money to spend. I would be really interested to know if there's like legal issues with that, because like Infault posts, he has a whole bunch of stuff that I've seen about being, knee deep in the swamp.
I think he's hunting a refuge though that doesn't allow for those motors. Like a lot of those
Well,
areas.
okay.
Yeah,
I've been in that swamp with him in the winter. I went to a scouting thing, and I didn't see. I mean, I guess there was like some maybe water access, but it wasn't. I mean, it was just all cattails. Like it's not. I don't think there's like a.
Isn't there water in the cattails?
Yeah, but I mean, what I mean is, like, I don't think that there's like a boat launch or like an area where you would like that would be like acceptable. Now, I don't know if you could. I mean, I guess if we were to liken it to a like a kayak, where you could if you could just drag your kayak in there and go through the cattails, I don't know that would be different. I guess it would be motorized, but it would it'd have to be posted or whatever. But it is some sort of like a refuge.
It would be anywhere I would think that you can duck hunt from a boat would be perfectly legal to deer hunt from it. I mean, if they've got people like I watched Bowhunter, not Bowhunter die, Kurt, what am I Curtis Zabel. Drawing a name blank.
Behind the Bow.
I watched it, Behind the Bow. I watched a video that he did, the life of a public land bow hunter, I think. And he kind of dips his kayak into this little canal in a marsh. And I'm thinking, man, if a guy could figure out a way to get a little mud motor boat in there, you have just skipped a whole lot of time. Like, and that goes back to the whatever's efficient, right? Like efficient and legal. That's the route that I want to go. So maybe in your area it is a kayak, maybe it's shallow stuff, shallow bodies of water. Maybe that's what it is. But man, there are options out there, and I think it's important. The moment that it clicked for me was when I I started thinking to myself, man, how cool would it be to make a spot that you could put a deer on the on a kayak trailer? Like I didn't even hunt with my kayak at this time, and I was like, that'd be cool. That'd be really cool. And I started asking around, like, do you guys know of any like water around here that is surrounded by public? And I'm telling you, everybody of my friends said, I don't never really heard of that. It's not really a thing. And then when I went and started looking at maps, I'm like, there's a freaking ton in the state of Alabama, like a ton. And so much to the fact that anywhere I've been, pretty much if you have a public body of water, there's probably some type of public property surrounding it. There's a good chance of it anyways. And so the two both really go together well because there are so many places. Tennessee is a great example. There are so many bodies of water in Tennessee that have public land around them, right? Like there's so many. I'm not going to tell everybody where they're at. You got to go find them yourself. But there's a lot. And I see that in a lot of states. And it gets overlooked a ton. It gets overlooked a ton. Even if you have, let's say you have 5 or 6 guys using a boat out of one boat ramp, that's 5 or 6 guys versus hundreds that are hunting that property. You know what I mean? Because that barrier for entry is so much harder. It just works, man. And I find it pretty much everywhere.
So I'm just thinking through that mud motor scenario versus kayak, and you've kind of you've done this because you've got a little outboard for your kayak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do the deer react to, or what is your strategy or whatever with the sound of the motor, like as you're approaching your spot, etc.?
I mean, I will say Walt's probably saying the same thing where he's hunted, because I know he pretty much rides his boat to the tree that he hunts a lot of places. I don't do that all the time. Like, you know, most of my spots I would say are within over a quarter mile from the boat, but I have a few spots that are a little bit closer. But most of them I would say about a quarter mile from the boat. And so, you know, I'm not always taking like into account what the deer are doing right there by the water, because it's just honestly like my access is going to be planned around where I think the deer or what I know the deer do in that area. And so I naturally adjust to that. Like, and then I also know that with water as kind of a boundary, like most of the time deer aren't going to be coming from that area. Does that make sense? Like there's a lot greater chance that they're going to be coming from the opposite direction because there's more land that way. And so I set up everything accordingly. Like I'll turn my motor off when I start getting close to my spot, but I mean, I try to be mindful, but the reality is there's fishermen coming down those coves at all times of the year. There are people who live on the lakes that I hunt who are yelling, you know, across their boat docks all day long. I had one guy, me and my dad had a guy that last year, like, get out and absolutely cuss us at like 4:30 in the morning. We got out of our boat and he was drunk or high or something, and he was just cussing us. I'm like, it was crazy. We were kind of at one point a little bit scared because we couldn't really see him. We could just hear him yelling. And I tell you what, dude, I saw a buck that day. I saw a buck later that day. Like it wasn't like, or later that morning, it wasn't like it totally ruined it. So a lot of the draw, I guess, for me with hunting close to water is that those deer usually they're not used to a whole lot of danger coming from that direction. And so when I mean, I've had plenty of deer just stand there as I get out of my boat and look at me. I mean, I'd say with 10 to 15 times a year, they just stand there and look at you and then mosey off. They don't really ever spook when you come at them from the boat when they see you that way. Now, once your feet hit the ground, it's a whole different story. But if you're in the water, most of the time they don't give a crap. They don't care.
And so, what would you driving the boat right to the tree? Like, what's your strategy on that?
They don't care. They see it all day, every day. I mean, I literally I was just scrolling through my phone trying to figure out which ones I was going to send you guys, but I've got photos of bass fishermen, like literally as I'm sitting 20 feet off the water. I mean, I'm literally my best spot. I am sitting on top of the water. The tree bends backwards. I'm in the saddle sitting out over the water. I have bass fishermen right up underneath me, and for some reason they're just so preoccupied they don't see the blaze orange vest, and literally it's almost predictable about right where they'll be in the brush, like, oh, there's a guy in the tree, and it's like, yeah, and there was a big blue boat right there too, like the whole time, like, that was the giveaway. But my philosophy on this, now don't get me wrong, I'm fairly stealthy about certain things like lingering noises. I try not to make it sound like I'm lingering, because they hear the transient. Dude, down here the mud motors are running from 2 a.m. Oh hell, they're moving from 2 a.m. to 10 p.m. I mean, they're out there, with these duck boats. You dang near could shoot it with a cannon and it wouldn't sink. And so they're just hauling butt at 20 miles an hour through these stump fields. So you've got bass fishermen and duck boats and all this human scent running through here. They don't care. I really don't think they care. I think what they're looking for, and in fact, I witnessed this happen last year with one of the biggest bucks I've ever seen. And again, that's credit to Parker hooking me up on the idea of water access. Last year was my first full year hunting from the boat, and my encounters went through the roof, because of what Parker said. People are scared. I've not seen a single person out there willing to get up at the hours I am and do what I'm doing, especially from something like a canoe, which is a glorified canoe. But I'll be running full tilt. I'll cut the motor off. I'll bring it up, and then as I glide up to the area, I'm using a push pole for like the last 100 feet or so, and then I'm hyper methodical about when I get to that bank, because I'm only about 50 to 60 yards from either of the bedding areas. I'm hyper methodical about mechanical noises, metal on metal, anything that sounds like it's lingering. I used to really worry about my footsteps as well. And then one of the days I'm over there, there's raccoons running around and otters running around up and coming down the bank, and it sounds just like people walking. I just don't think they care. I think they're looking for something human, predator, and lingering. And as long as you don't hit those three criteria, I think you're fine. I frankly think that even if you were to take the mud motor idea I gave you and put it in Michigan, I don't think they're going to be like, oh, well, you know what? That sounds like a predator. I mean, it'd be so unique. I don't think deer have this intrinsic ability to go, well, that's outside the norm, and I'm going to associate it wholly with a human presence. I just don't think it. I don't think those are the kind of things that matter. I think access, like the direction you access it, one of the reasons I hunt right off the water is because I have these two finger ridges. I say that with air quotes for anybody listening, because it's a modest change. I have these two finger ridges that a trail runs down, and the reason why that spot is good is because I can run my boat right up to that area. There's a couple blow down trees that I can tuck my boat into so that they can't see it, and I don't leave any human scent. I never cross the main trails that they go up to. I hunt it with the thermals, with the wind pulling down into my face, and that access, if I were to come from the opposite side, if it was possible, I'd ruin the area, and I'd run the risk of educating those deer that that motor cutting off at 100 feet and then gentle noises, that's human. But it's a strategy that is wildly successful in my opinion.
Hey,
Yep.
another thing too about the water is most of the time that you're at the water, which is going to be like in that early morning and late in the evening, like when I guess you could say it would matter. I typically like to hunt mornings the most, and I think it's because my access is so perfect from water,
Yeah.
because thermals are always pulling towards where you're accessing from. So they're never we're always accessing from the lower elevation, right? Because we're on the water. It's usually creeks, drainages, and things like that. And so when you access early in the morning, all your thermals are basically just pulling back towards you, and not broadcasting out to every deer. Now, I have spots where I have to go straight from the water, and I climb up a bluff, and all of a sudden I'm coming in from the top to the rest of the spot. And so those do happen occasionally, but for the most part, your access is pretty good. Um, And I think a lot of times deer aren't going to run because they can't smell you, right? They see something out there. They can't. I've seen deer act weird. I've seen them act crazy because they can't figure it out, and they do everything that they can to try to get a whiff of whatever that is that's going on there, but they can't because it's just always pulling.
Yeah, and I think that for me, I'm just like so intrigued because like I said, my buddy's hunted down there. I've hunted down there with him, and he's super successful. There's a fair amount of access. There's a fair amount of hunters, but there's fishermen, there's people running trap lines, there's people, I mean, there's constantly boats and all of that. And I guess it's just one of those things that keeps you away. And it's like one of these things where I drive by it every day and I'm like, I know there's big deer in there. Like I know,
Mm-hmm.
but it's the going against the current, like in a kayak or something like that. But like I said, it's a pretty significant water. So I'm like, but we have access to a boat. Like I have, like Frank's boat's been sitting in the garage for the last 4 or 5 years. He hasn't touched it. It's 16-foot modified V, 25 horse. It's like, I should probably just learn how to man that.
Yeah, just use that.
It's probably about time, right? I mean, I guess
I
if I
would say.
mess it up, it's not mine.
I realized at some point.
Just
So
work one more day next week, Adam.
Yeah, well, it's overrated.
when I got my motor on my kayak, I had like built a whole brand on kayak hunting, and I finally got my motor. And I was like, well, flip. Now, for the first time at like 29 years old, I had to get my boating license. I'd never gotten it before. Like I built a whole brand on water access. I don't even have a boating license.
Yeah, now you got to do the MC numbers and you got to get yourself
Yeah, I got all
legal and
that done now.
stickered.
I'm official. I'm a boater.
Well, I really do appreciate that because I think for a lot of guys, obviously you spark that in a lot of guys, including Walter there, that that like I joke around, it's the CrossFit, it's the saddle hunting, kayak hunting, public land trifecta, right? It's like
Yep.
it is what it is. But it's effective, it's efficient, and whatever people think about public land, whether it's the coolest thing, whether it's harder, whether it's less than, you know, we live in an area, fortunately, and it sounds like you do too, where there's lots of it. So, there's lots of play. What I've learned about public land, like I said, since I was a kid and thinking that it was one of those less than type things, is that there's just plenty of room to get away. Where
Yeah.
on your piece of private, add a few more guys and it gets bad real quick, unless it's just your sanctuary. You throw, like we'd have 6, 8, 10 guys on our piece of private. Well, I can go out public with a lot less pressure than that, you know. So I think that the water access, opens up a lot for guys, and to think of it, I think in the South, especially with Florida for you, Walter, it seems like that's what Florida is, right? It's the Everglades. That's what you think of. That's when I think about, oh, where are you deer hunting? Like, I don't think about, that you're maybe just hunting somewhere hot that doesn't have deer. I think it's always snakes and haints and gators and all these terrible things that the South has in the dark, right? Well, that's what when you were talking about the fog, that's exactly what I was thinking of.
We didn't
Just for,
even mention the meth heads. We got a lot of them.
Or the hobos.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I'd also say the water access is sometimes just a different access to the same piece. I don't water access places that don't have hunters, or you couldn't just as easily find a way to hunt it from the road, right? I mean, if you go to these places that I'm going, there's tracks up and down the road. There's boot marks up and down the road. You could access these areas on foot. I'm just getting creative with how I enter and exit that area. It also happens to be a barrier to entry for people that they don't want to do. I mean, we do have, unfriendly encounters with alligators here, pretty common. And so when you said get away, it just kind of sparked that, get away. We oftentimes think overlooked spots. We think, getting as far, going deeper, going further. Sometimes getting away is just accessing something in an unconventional way or an unnecessary way, such that you're getting up to a place where other people aren't or aren't as effectively getting to. So I just wanted to put that little like tidbit in the back of people's minds, because there's a lot of, you know, 5 to 30 acre areas that if you got a little creative with how you access them, they'd all be much better hunting.
I'll tell you, that was never more apparent than Eric and I hunted in Missouri, and we went across this. I don't know if it was like a dike or like some sort of like man-made pond, but we went across to these ridges, and we both saw bucks. He missed a buck over there and had deer right underneath him. And the next day we pushed a little bit further into there, and we got into some pretty good sign. But I've never seen like the amount of disappointment on a guy's face when he walked from the other way, which was like at least 2 to 3 miles to get there, and then saw us whistle at him in the tree. And it was like, he's like, oh my God, like that's the disappointment. So when you say that, that's exactly it. Is, you're getting to that same spot that someone very well could, want to be hunting. Um, in that case, it was less effort, but less scent, less everything. And man, was he disappointed. He was
Dude,
very
I
bummed.
I can't tell you, Adam, how many times that has happened to me. Um, like it happens to me often. Mostly when I'm out of state. I will say in my stuff at home, like I'm usually not going to fiddle fart with it if a ton of people can get to it. I agree with Walter. I definitely agree with Walter. I'm not disagreeing with him here. I think the access, can be the quote unquote game changer in an area like the one that he's referring to. Um, if a spot is so good and deer will stay in it. If it's got the cover and it's got the food, they're gonna just figure out how to survive still within it, and they're gonna avoid that pressure. And so I do agree with that. But on out of state hunts, dude, it happens so many times where some jerk will come, humping it up the hill, just bebopping, gonna get to his spot, which is probably where my boat's at. Because it's like these opposites, right? So from the parking lot going deep is going to where I park my boat at. And from where I park my boat at, where I park my boat at, the going deep is getting closer to the access a lot of time. And so like you really have to focus on, and I keep coming back to this, like this idea of efficiency. What is the most efficient way to do this? Don't use a boat if it's not the most efficient way. If it makes more sense to do it from the land, then do that. You know what I mean? Like figure out like you've got to be more efficient, right? Like that's my ultimate goal. And I've had to talk myself out of using my boat because I don't want to hunt that spot and not use my boat. That wouldn't be freaking cool. That wouldn't be cool at all. And so I've talked myself out of going, and there's places here at home that I know there's big bucks, and I just talk myself out of going there because I don't get to use my boat. And we've got to change that. You figure out the way to be the most efficient in your area, and that might be buying some rock climbing gear and climbing bluffs. Man, I'm telling you, there's some bluffs in Tennessee. If a guy would climb them, there ain't no freaking telling what's up there, on top of those mountains. It might be getting some waders and doing what Infault does. That's what separates him from people there, is that he just pounds mud through those swamps. And so it's going to change. This creative access is going to change from place to place. And I think the important thing, that if I wanted somebody to gain some type of encouragement or inspiration is to find out what that barrier is and figure out how can I do it. Don't say, oh, well, you just can't do that. How can you do it? Right? Like, it's a pretty easy concept. Just figure it out.
Just figure it out. I think
Just
that's one
figure
of
it
the,
out.
I think that's one of the things too, that as I go through this, the efficiency thing is one thing. But I think the people that are truly successful are the people that put in the work over and over, time and time again. And, you're not, maybe out of state. Um, but everything that we talked about with the access through the water and all this stuff, like, you're not just going in there once, like, oh, I'm just going to hunt this blind. I'm getting up at 2 a.m. I'm going to pack all my stuff up and I'll go find a tree in the dark. I mean, maybe you do that. But I don't think that that's where you like hang your hat, especially in your own, in your own neighborhood, right? You've been in
Well,
there at least
yeah,
at some point. You've gone in there, verified that all that work and scariness, terror is going to be worth it,
man, I'm going to be
at some
honest with
point.
you. That's not true. That really isn't true. Um, I wanted to sit here and agree with you on it, but I can't because it's not true. Like my my best hunts that I've ever had, like, yeah, of course I've got spots that I go to. Um, but the best hunts that I've had at pretty much every spot that I have, honestly, was the first or second time that I went there. Like, and a lot of the time it was during just just in season. So a couple of years ago, I did New Spot Monday, and I would just go to a different spot every single Monday. It was my first year of being self-employed, and I could hunt whenever I wanted. And so I was like, okay, how can I make Mondays valuable? So during archery season, that's what I did, New Spot Monday. And those were largely water access spots, and I'd just go in there and I'd hunt it. And then after I'd hunt it, I'd scout it for a little bit and figure out, is this a place where I want to spend my time? And if I found the sign, if there was tracks on the beach, uh, all that stuff, that's when I would go. You'll find with water a lot of times, and in the South, this is a Southern thing too, because we don't have a lot of agriculture around here, is their patterns shift so big. And by that I mean, like, you might find them in the big woods on the public land once the acorns drop. But your summer scouting, if what you're going to do is look for sign, like tracks and heavy trails and stuff, you're not going to find them because all those deer are in the clear cuts on private land. They're not in the big public woods. There might be a few, but you're not going to find that same sign. So I hugely depend on in-season scouting whenever I'm hunting here at home. I mean, so much. Like, and because of that, I don't put a whole lot into going to a spot beforehand. Like, I'm going to go in with the intention of hunting. I'm going to scout as best as I can in the dark, find a good spot, sit till 8, and then scout the rest of the area. Um, and most of the time, my best encounters came from that first sit, on that gut instinct of where to set up, and how to hunt it. The biggest deer that I've killed have been on those first sits in the area, or first time in the area.
So I guess I'll go back and ask you this then. So when you were first uh starting your water access journey, was that the case?
It was the case that my best encounters came from the first sits.
But I mean,
That was
had
still the
had
case.
you had you gone in and
I scouted routes. That's what I scouted. I scouted routes and beaches, because you'll consistently find that around water, um, there's going to be tracks, right? Like, deer are going to use that water all year long, and you're going to find tracks. So if I go to a spot and I just run and troll that beach, those muddy creek drainages, and I'm not finding any tracks, then my assumption was there's probably not a ton of deer in here. If I'm not finding them in these natural funnels that they're going to be using where all the good stuff is growing, then they're probably not in this area too thick. And so I would just go and find those things. But I'm also scouting. I would scout the access from the roads. I want to make sure if I use my boat to get back into a spot, I want to make sure that hunt's not going to get blown out by some joker walking through the woods because there was a trail that didn't show up on Onyx or something like that. And that's happened several times. I learned that lesson. And so I'll go when I get the idea to go to a new spot, I'll at some point I'm going to go and drive around the perimeter of that area and make sure that there's not any like unmarked parking areas, or because that's pretty common, right? Like that's not unheard of. You can't always do that on an out of state hunt because you don't have that amount of time. But that does play into it every once in a while. And so while I do scout the routes, I hardly ever scout the spots unless I'm, just doing a scouting day or something like that, which is rare.
And would you say that holds true for you, Walter, or how are you finding these spots?
Parker and I have kind of a distinct. Well, actually, he's kind of getting into this game this year as well. So I think our styles are gonna just continue to meld. But I rely a lot on trail cameras to dictate when, and where I go places. I do a lot of in-season scouting. I'm not scared to go into an area and blow it up. And in some cases, Parker was there when I found the one I was talking about earlier. I knew deer went down this little finger ridge down towards the body of water, and we blew down in there. We found a rub line. I hung a camera, and we started getting buck pictures moving through that area. They were on a scrape, and so I would say that my best encounters definitely don't come on the first hunts often. Um, but on my first hunts, I'm also not scared to get down and do a lot of walking and blow deer out of there and stuff like that. So Parker has terrain advantages that allow him to be um, that allow him to use a skill set that he has, which is he can very quickly identify areas that are going to be high yield areas. Whereas down here, I have to do a lot more blow through an area, bust a deer out of a bed, kind of like a bump and dump long term, where you bust the deer out of that area, you go back and figure out why he was there. And then in the coming years, relying on trail cameras to help you kind of hone in on when you're going to hunt there. I would say that my best hunt last year came on my second hunt in that area, third hunt in that area. Kind of different areas we bounced around, but yeah, second hunt in that area. I saw the biggest buck I've seen on public land. And when I punched into another area a week later, I had another huge 8 point come out, and buddy of mine actually got a shot at it before I did. So there is something to be said about that first few sits is how I would say in the South, those first few sits being really productive. But I mean, it's also heavily skewed. But like I said, I'm doing a lot of trail camera usage, and Parker this year is diving into the cell camera game. And so he's a fellow sellout as well. And it's going to impact.
Sellout, is that spelled with a C?
Yeah.
Is that a thing? If that is a thing, then
it's
I
not.
didn't
We need
know
to
it.
make it a shirt
We
before.
should
I was
totally make it.
I was gonna say that's got to be a shirt in a series.
Sell out. I like that.
Adam,
No,
how long can you sit on this?
Sell out with the
I
Southern Collective.
I got a whole lot of free cell cameras on accident, so uh,
Fell
so
off
I'm
a
gonna
truck.
use them. No, I mentioned earlier that I got this thing coming up with Tether doing the tagged out tour. I'm gonna be producing that show. And so I'm not going to get to do a lot of the early season hunting. A lot of the time I have really good rut success because the early season I find the doe groups, and then I'll adjust in the area for where I feel like the most rut activity is going to happen based on the terrain or vegetation or whatever. But this year I'm not going to have the ability to locate those groups and kind of keep tabs throughout the early season like I normally do. And so I'm going to be dependent on these cell cameras to tell me what deer are doing in the area, and I think it's going to help me. I think it's going to help me. My biggest problem, I don't think, is ever finding where the deer are at, or finding mature deer. Honestly, like I could tell you about two of them that I should have killed last year on one of my toughest seasons ever. I had two great opportunities that I screwed up, right? Like, but then the other thing that I've always done is I've always I never know the deer that are in the area because my hunting style is a lot of in-season scouting and going to new spots and things. And so I don't ever really know the deer. And I feel like I make a lot of mistakes and I shoot deer that maybe I wouldn't have shot had I known what it actually looked like. Um, on camera, I'm happy about every deer kill that I get, and I never really make it that big of a deal if I shoot a deer that's a little bit smaller. Um, and sometimes I do it on freaking purpose. You know what I mean? Like sometimes I'm like, I just got to kill a deer right now. I don't care what it looks like. Um, but a cell camera, I have seen it with so many people are like, I was about to shoot that deer, then I realized, oh, I know what deer that is. Mm-hmm. That's not a deer that I want to shoot. And golly, if I had that of 2 of the bucks that I killed last year, 3 of the bucks that I killed last year, if I would have actually known what they looked like and it wouldn't have been kind of a rush situation, I probably wouldn't have shot them. You know what I mean? Um, I did, I don't want to discount that because I also am an advocate for shoot whatever makes you happy. I'm simply just talking about mistakes that I've made that I feel like have hindered me from being able to fully, uh, I guess, perform is the right way, or make those game time decisions. And cell camera is going to be huge, man. That's going to be huge for that.
So one of the things, and I talk about this often, and I use cell cameras. It's not like a big deal to me, like one way or the other. But I'm also not like in a position to where, like, and you and I have had this conversation before, like, but where I'm in a position to be like, well, where I should be like sorting my deer, right? Like I shouldn't be like, well, you know, that one his threes aren't good enough, or like I can't
Oh
judge a deer
crap,
like
no.
that. It's
I ain't doing that.
that's not me
We're
by
talking about we're
yeah.
talking about not shooting a 6-point because you don't know what he actually looks like. That's what we're talking about.
Right. But one of my things is like I love, and it's one of the things I love about hunting, but I love about like public land hunting. I love like we talked earlier about proof of concept, but like just going into an area and being like, okay, I found this area, there should be bucks here, like whatever. You get up a tree, buck walks out, like, you know, if it makes me happy, like I want to shoot him. I don't want to think about like I know there's 2 other ones that normally run with him, and like should I wait, or like am I gonna get busted, or like any of this stuff. Like I love that like validation of like I picked the spot, here's the deer, and you get a little bit of that when you put a trail camera out, right? So you're like, okay, yeah, I knew that there was deer in this area, but like by like choosing, by saying like, oh, it's uh I'll PG this up because I know like you're the youth pastor and the thing you were whatever.
I'm not. I'm not. You
Yeah,
can say whatever
but
you want, Adam.
but
Say
so
it.
my father-in-law used to say, when you start sorting your screwing, the only one you're screwing is yourself. And that's kind of the way that it is with like not shooting bucks, right? It's like you're you may be going home with tag soup when you probably shouldn't be, unless you're like in a different class of hunter, or you're putting in all this extra work and your confidence level is like super high, like what that I don't need to kill that deer because I'm going to kill one over here. And I think that's where a lot of people they get so infatuated with these pictures where that changes, like, I don't even want to say like who they are, but who they think they
It
are,
does. And big time. You know the guys I'm talking about. They're like, man, he's 3.5-year-old, whatever. Like, listen. Here's how did you say it to me, Walter? It's funny you just mentioned cuss and Adam because we had a conversation about whether we're gonna cuss on platform um, in the future yesterday, and Walter responded like this. He said, "I see your opinion and I respect it." So, Adam, I see that opinion and I respect it. What I'm talking, and whenever I had a full-time job and had weekends to hunt, frick, dude, I don't care. Like, I really don't. Like, if I go out there and I kill a buck and it made me happy, we're good to go. I have time now. You know what I mean? Like, I arguably have less time, but for hunting and deer and hunting season, I'm able to prioritize my time. And so that for me was the big thing with using a cell camera. I was like, I mean, I'm like you, man. Like I love the surprise and I love the knowing and or the not knowing what a deer looks like and making those mistakes and kind of kicking yourself and laughing about it later. Those are great and I love them, but I want to be able to like use my time as best as I can and challenge myself uh, to be better. And so I would not expect like Walter. Walter gets to hunt weekends. If Walter told me that he had a limit, like a score limit on the deer that he was killing, I'd I'd want to hit his big toe with a hammer. I just like Walter is he gets to hunt weekends. That's it. Like go out there and make the most of the time, set realistic expectations. It's the realistic expectations that I think people get hung up on. Like, yeah, there's big bucks in your area. There's big bucks in a lot of areas, and if you have a camera out there all the time, you might catch them. That doesn't really make you. That doesn't. That's not the hunt. You know what I mean? Like you can't just depend on that to tell you what you need to know, right? Like you got to go out there and you still got to put in the time. You still got to learn and put in that effort. It's not like a magic solution. But yeah, dude, like I think anybody should set those realistic expectations for themselves. Don't with a trail camera, it's easy. And I'm worried about myself getting like hyper focused on specific deer because I've never really had that problem. And I do tend to get hyper focused on things. Um, and so like I'm hoping that that's not the case. I hope I can still go out and enjoy it and have a great
You'll get
time.
hyper focused, but what you'll find is you'll get hyper focused because of the need to be hyper focused. You're gonna get a buck that comes through every day for like 3 days in a row at 10 a.m. and you're gonna be like, oh, and every day, like day one it comes through and you're like, if he does that again tomorrow, like I'm gonna get him. And day two gets there, and then every hour of that day when that photo comes through, you're gonna just be like all about it. And then when he quits showing up on camera, you're gonna bounce to other spots because you're also an established enough a hunter. You're not going to rely just on that trail camera. I think
Mm-hmm.
that trap that you're talking about are people who are hunting solely for the outcome of killing a big deer, or people who are very new to hunting and they're relying way too heavily on one component of the entire puzzle, right? And I tell people all the time, or I did on Chasing Tails, find two or more reasons to hunt that area. Okay, great. You found a hot feed tree. Is it 1,000 yards from the nearest security cover? Then there's no reason to hunt right here, right? Like that's only one reason. And I think trail camera pictures kind of fall into like the half measure of a reason. There needs to be more than just a photo of a deer coming through the area for you to hunt it. Can you access it appropriately? Do you know why he's coming through that area? Can you catch him coming from a different area? And so I think what you're going to see is it's going to make you a more efficient hunter at targeting the quality of bucks you could if you knew what was in that area. I don't think it's really going to change like your approach to things. And I'm willing to bet throughout the course of this year, you're going to wind up shooting some not huge buck is going to come through just roaring during the rut, and we're going to get a beautiful photo, Insta360 video of you crushing and the deer like rolling, and you're going to call, your phone call is going to be to your dad. He's not as big as I thought he was, but like it's going to happen because you're out there for that adventure as much as you are trying to like punch a buck tag.
Right.
What
Yeah. It's just got to remain fun. That's my thing. Is like
Yeah.
if it stops being fun and I get too focused on a big deer, which feels like what cell cameras could potentially do to me personally, then I don't want any part of it, man. I'll go back to making the mistakes and you know having fun. It's just got to be fun.
Yeah, but I don't think that's the case, and I think it's exactly like what Walter was saying. I think for the 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 guys that we were talking about that and I don't know if we were talking about them prior to the podcast or whatever, but these guys that are just like consistent like murderers, like a Troy Pottinger or something, right? Like a guy like that is probably doesn't even have cell service on all of his cameras, but what he's doing is he's chronicling that info. And exactly what Walter said is like that 10 o'clock picture comes in, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 10 o'clock. Novice hunter A would be like, oh, I'm going to be there tomorrow, and doesn't look at the wind, doesn't look at why that deer's there. And you look and you say, okay, well, that was, a southwest wind and there was a cold front or whatever. And then, so now it's switching to an east wind or a north wind. So I can't access that. So the next time I get a southwest wind, whether I get a picture or not, I'm going to be right there. Things that you would do normally, but now you just have more information instead of saying like that guy that gets those pictures and he's like, oh, I'm going there tomorrow, like regardless that deer's in the area, and just completely screwing it up. And I think that's the difference, is you just have, like you said, a lot of times earlier, like you're talking about hunting and accessing the most efficient way. This is just a more efficient way to get that information. You still have to process it. You still have to execute the same way. And you just have a different pool to pull from. Like you don't have to go get that card to have that information. And I think that that's the main thing that I see with guys who are, I call them like hunters and trail camera enthusiasts. Like the guys that get the pictures at midnight of these big bucks and they're like, oh yeah, this is great. And then they collect this, computer full of pictures, but then the wall is bare, because it's like, well, I'm just going to sit here and hope that they come by, instead of saying like, what direction were they coming from? Where was the wind? Like, what time is it? How far back do I have to go to kill these deer? Which is where I think that, like yourself, like a next level hunter or a guy that's putting in the work, successful, whatever, like you don't need like the proof of concept, right? You're just going to take that same information and process it like you normally would. So,
and I know, here's the other thing that I know too, and I'll wrap up this thought. I know how I take things, and whenever I've been watching a big buck on a camera do the same thing for 3 days, and then I go and hunt him and he doesn't do that, I'm gonna take that personal. Like it's gonna be it's gonna be a bad day for me. It's gonna be a bad day for my wife. Like that's my natural tendency, is to really take that. And that's gonna be hard. That's gonna be something that, I mean, most people use trail cameras. Most people use cell cameras these days. And I kind of feel like I'm a little bit late to the game, and you guys have already figured out how to kind of process those things happening. And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Like, I've never really experienced that.
Yeah.
It will happen. And at that point in time, you'll never rely solely on a trail camera picture again. Like it'll just be done at that point in time. But I tell you, the cool thing for me is, I think getting that real long data in real time, like it sounds funny, but like a long soak of a cell camera, being able to see that progression in real time, not the information being, hey, Jesus, not that information being, my dog was like scratching the carpet in the corner. I didn't know what that was.
I didn't know if it was Elena or
that's how my wife talks to me, not how I talk to my wife. But being able to see those trends in real time over a period of time, like getting the big buck photos, those are cool. But you see the does start to come through as groups, and then suddenly they're broke up, and then the bucks are coming in groups, and the bucks are broke up, and the fawns are no longer on the does, and you start seeing these trends start to happen across the WMA. It's not so much having the ability to say that deer was here, I'm going to go kill him. It's like, okay, I thought this would be what happened, generally speaking, and then being able to confirm or challenge that perception in real time. That's a huge advantage. You're going to get all that information at the end of the year. The only difference is you get to kind of read the book as the season goes.
Yeah, I think you're not going to be disappointed. I think you just have to like manage another dopamine hit which is when that picture comes in. And you're going to have to figure, if you thought like likes or comments or subscribers on YouTube or whatever was cool, like, you know, bucks at, 10 a.m. on a crisp, cool morning. It's like, now you're like those likes and comments and stuff, you can't do anything about them. And you're like, I should be in the woods. Like, what am I doing? I'm in the wrong spot. Like, that's the real thing that you're going to need to manage now.
That's
So,
right.
so you talked about the tethered tagged out tour and stuff like that. What do you guys have coming up this fall for the Southern Collective?
Lots of great things. So you guys y'all had Walter on plenty of times. I'm sure you talked about Patreon hunts and things like that. But we're gearing up for some Patreon hunts I think Walter, we've got like 4 spots left. 2 spots left.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like, to me, like, man, I've gone on, whenever it was chasing tails, I've gone on those hunts before. And it turns into the hunts that you look forward to the most, because the group of guys is so much fun to hang out with. Largely, a lot of my stuff's been solo for most of me and my dad when I was a kid, but now a lot of solo stuff. And I really look forward to those times whenever I get to go and hang out in camps with people. And so, I mean, all these cool states I get to hunt with tethered, and my Alabama stuff, that'll be fun. But I'm mostly looking forward to those times when we can really just hang out, like, be around other people that are like-minded, enjoy campfire. That sounds nice right now.
Yeah, and I think one of the things where I said, you guys aren't going to see necessarily more content, but a better quality of content. We've got 2 hunts planned as SoCo where everybody's going to be hunting together. One is going to be the Patreon hunt. The other one's going to be in December. If Matt, can go ahead and kill his deer and grace us with his presence. But we've got a lot of content from last year. Basically, the reason why no one saw any content up until now is because all of it was being archived for this upcoming fall. And we're kicking it off with Brett's. Can I say this, Parker? Can we like put this out there?
Yeah. I mean, we put it on social media. I'm editing it at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
It's
so
in the background.
Brett, a South Alabama boy, I mean, we're talking 40 minutes from Florida, drove out to one of the hardest places in the U.S. to hunt, Missouri, and killed an absolute hammer, and got it all on film. It's his first solo film. Adam's red in the face right now. I got him right as he was drinking water. But went out there and grinded it out, I think, for about 4 or 5 days.
9.
Passed.
9.
Was it 9 days?
9 days.
Okay, so 9 days, but he passed a couple studs. In fact, Parker was watching the video and he's like, "Did he pass that deer when it ran past him?" I mean, I would have crushed it.
Well, this you want to talk about proof of concept. After editing that video and looking at that deer, I'm like, oh no, probably not. But then that first shot, I'm like, I'd freaking kill him in a heartbeat. That's my problem. This is my problem, guys. I'm in Missouri, and I would kill a 100-inch deer because he kind of looked big.
Yeah. But he got it all on camera and like just crushed the video, his first ever attempt. And so that's going to kick off a whole series of content from everything we had last year. And then you guys are going to get to see, true community through the videos as we go. And I'm just going to be honest with you. When you have 4 guys who could run a camera all hunting together, the quality of those videos are going to explode, right? The drag outs are going to get documented, and the blood trails are going to get documented, and the drama at camp, Florida man, when he shows up, like, that's going to get documented. And so it's just going to be a lot of fun. I'm really excited. I know the footage that's coming. We've talked about it. I'm not going to put it all out there like I'm prone to, but I know people are really going to enjoy what's coming down the pipe.
And so I think there's going to be more. I mean, what Walter said, there's not going to be more. I think there will be more.
Okay.
Because there's more people. I really do. I think it's going to end up being more.
Yeah.
More content than anybody who's ever been subscribed to me or Walter have ever gotten. And it's going to be so much fun. I can't wait. get
I
it
just to
started.
clarify, I meant like more types of content this fall. Like there's not going to be like it's going to be a lot of hunting videos, right? Like it's
Oh
not
yeah,
going
it's
to
just
be
gonna be a
like
lot of. We're just gonna kill a lot of stuff.
a lot of
Hopefully,
death.
yeah, just a lot of death and destruction.
Yeah. And we are currently planning, in case anybody's interested, we have been scheming. People like Adam turn their nose up when we say we're some of the hardest hunters and the best hunters down here in the South. One of the things we're trying to find is where a roving mob of Floridians can go and just decimate a deer population. We're looking at whatever states allow us to just go and waylay whatever walks out. And so we've got a couple big candidates, but I think there was a theme that rolled up this week about a traveling band of Floridians just ready to go out and ruin some people's days shooting 60 to 80-inch deer in every doe a day that we're allowed. So stay tuned for that, because I think that's going to happen. And Adam, that might be the first time I leave the state is leading the tribe.
Yeah, and I,
Are we,
I don't know how it carries over. I believe that it does. But I'm still a member of the Patreon for this whole
Did
deal,
you
I
fix your
believe.
card? Because it bounced a couple years back and you haven't.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it did just get compromised, so I do need to update that. Um, but yeah, so whenever you do decide to head to the Midwest, that'll be the one that I sign up for. Um, but as Park kind of alluded to, there was stuff on Chasing Tails. There was stuff on Southern Ground. So where can people go and find this content now? Like how is that all coming together?
well, I'm glad you asked. So with this, we both had brands, and so we kind of took the strongest things from each of our brands. So our YouTube is going to be, if you are subscribed to the Southern Ground Hunting YouTube channel, then you're still subscribed to the Southern Collective YouTube channel. We just changed the name, changed the graphics and the branding and stuff. Um, the thing that we did not stay the same on is the podcast network. So um, for people who have listened to us to Southern Ground Hunting, we've been with the Sportsman's Nation turned Sportsman's Empire, and we've been doing that for like 5 years. And I love Dan. Dan is one of the greatest influences I've ever had, and partially because he was the first person to really give me a shot with any type of platform in the hunting space. And so I owe a lot to Dan, and the Sportsman's Empire is a great place. Um, the reality was Walter had a system, had a great relationship, and so we're moving everything over to Waypoint with Walter, where the Chasing Tails was. And you can kind of explain that, Walter, how you went about all that.
Yeah, I mean, we're part of the Waypoint podcasting network, and uh, that relationship there gave. I just muted myself. Um, I swiped a beard hair off the keyboard and muted myself. I don't know how I did that. Waypoint gives us a
Beard hair.
platform to launch some of the things that we have coming down the pipe that I'm not going to talk about. But we have big visions for SoCo. One of the things about this merger was Parker and I's ability to execute, like he said at the very beginning, those things that we said this would be awesome to do, and then it just goes into the hope chest. And one day if you win the lottery, our combined talents give us that ability to really execute. And so that structure there with Waypoint is one of the reasons we stay there. So if you were subscribed to Chasing Tails Outdoors, you're now subscribed to the Southern Collective. And if you were listening to Southern Ground previously, that feed's going to disappear and turn into something else, I'm sure. So what I would tell people is go to our website, which will probably be live about the time he drops this, and if not, it'll be pretty close. Go to the
August
website.
1st. It's going live
August.
August 1st. So if it's after
Okay,
August 1st, then
there you go.
we go.
Or just Google the Southern Collective Hunting Podcast. It's going to take you right to where it is. It's the only name even remotely close to it, despite the word Southern being in there. And we'd love to have you over there. It's going to be a really good time. Some really focused content, some seriously unfocused content when it's a roundtable discussion. I'm really looking forward to it, and I think people are really going to enjoy what's coming down the pipe.
Well, awesome, guys. I'm looking forward to not only the collaboration with the podcast and all of that, but the video and everything. And I appreciate you coming on here tonight and kind of talking about it, and then indulging me in my questions on water access and all that stuff as well.
Well, you got me pumped up, man. Like I thought we were just coming on here to talk about the Southern Collective and all the changes, and you got to go off talking about water access and
I know.
why it's great.
That's kind of what I do.
Fired up.
You know,
Get me
I
fired
can't.
up, bro.
It's not all sales. So, but thank you guys for taking time out of your evening tonight, and I do appreciate you.
Thanks, buddy.
Appreciate you, man.